Hi friends, today it's your boy Jacob here. In this video today we are going to look at the salary of our clinical officers here in Uganda, and we are going to compare the salary of the clinical officers in Uganda versus the salary of clinical officers in Kenya. We are going to compare them and see where you fall and whether it's almost the same or not, and see the comparison of the salary of both uh, countries. And basically in this video I'm going to give a detailed description of the updated salary of clinical officers both in these countries. So if you're new here to my channel, consider subscribing, hit the likes button, and don't forget to share my videos to all your friends who enjoy my content. So if I'm start with the salary of clinical officers here in Uganda, a mere clinical officer with a diploma in clinical medicine here in Uganda, currently 2025, they earn around 2 million shillings. That's a U5, 2 million shillings. When you convert it to dollars, around $600,000. For our friends who are international and want these conversions, yes, 2 million shillings in Uganda is equivalent to around $600,000, and that's the basic salary which falls under a U5 for all diploma courses. Now, a senior clinical officer in Uganda, that one is a clinical officer who has had like 3 years of experience, and all these salaries I'm talking about are in a government scale, not private settings. Private settings can give anyone any salary they need, but basically in a government setting, a senior clinical officer earns around 4.4 million shillings on a gross pay. When they get the deductions and everything, I think they come around 3.6, 3.5 million shillings for a senior clinical officer. Now that's a huge jump from a mere clinical officer without any experience, but one who comes in a government scale with experience, they come to around the gross of 4.4 million shillings, and after deductions comes to around 3.5 million shillings, and just slightly above 1,000 US dollars if you are to convert it in dollars. Then we have principal clinical officers. That's the highest level of a clinical officer here in Uganda. So a principal clinical officer is one who has a diploma in clinical medicine and is a senior clinical officer who has gone on to study management and has that diploma in management and has applied to government as a principal clinical officer. Those ones are around only 200,000 Ugandan shillings over senior clinical officer. So a principal clinical officer comes around 4.6 million shillings in Uganda, and basically that's also slightly over $1,000. So the difference between a senior and a principal is only 200,000 Ugandan shillings, but the difference between a senior and a mere clinical officer is quite huge, over 1 million shillings in Uganda. So that is the basic salary of clinical officers. Those are the three grades: a clinical officer, a senior clinical officer, and a principal clinical officer here in Uganda. So we are going to look at the salary of clinical officers in Kenya. So right here in this video, I'm going to compare our salaries, COs in Kenya and COs in Uganda. So here are the salaries of COs in Kenya, the last I know of. So these are the approximated salaries in Kenya. Salaries for clinical officers in Kenya depend on the county. Different counties give different salaries, and also the allowances which keep up the figures. And remember, clinical medicine in Kenya, they also offer degrees and also offer specialities, like in reproductive health, anesthesia, dermatology, which are not so much in Uganda. Rarely do clinical officers in Uganda specialize. Yes, they specialize in anesthesia, but it's not doesn't guarantee them a special fee. Yeah, so down here in Kenya, even clinical officers who are interns are paid a salary. So interns who are clinical officers with a diploma in Kenya are paid around 15,000 Kenyan shillings. In dollars, that's $116. Then intern clinical officers with a degree in Kenya are paid 80,000 Kenyan shillings. That's around 6,017 dollars. So intern clinical officer with a degree in Kenya also almost earns the same amount with a diploma clinical officer who's already qualified. So that's a difference, as you can notice. The Kenyan clinical officers slightly on the lower level, they get more than what Ugandan clinical officers earn. So when you go to clinical officers with a diploma in Kenya, most of them earn between 70,000 to 80,000 Kenyan shillings. In dollars, that's around 540 to 617 US. That's how much they earn. Like we said, their salaries differ from county to county. So this is an overview and the range of their salaries. So degree clinical officers in Kenya earn between 120 to 130 Kenyan shillings. That's around 929 to $1,000 monthly. Unfortunately, in Uganda, there are degrees at KIU, but not so many people do them. And there's no salary scale for a degree clinical officer in Uganda, but in Kenya they have. So that's the salary of a degree clinical officer in Kenya. It ranges between 120 to 130 Kenyan shillings. Then clinical officers who are specialized with the higher diplomas. Even in Uganda, we have higher diplomas like in anesthesia and ophthalmic clinical officers, but usually they don't offer them a special fee. But in Kenya, they do. They have clinical officers, higher diploma in anesthesia, dermatology, reproductive health. Those clinical officers earn between $100,000 to 110,000 Kenyan shillings. In dollars, that's 772 to 849 US dollars. So that's the hierarchy of clinical officers in Kenya and their salaries. You can compare with our Ugandan salaries. So when it comes to specialities, it's not so much different, but they have a degree in clinical medicine, which earns quite well. And in Uganda, we don't have a degree in clinical. It's there, but it's not officially recognized. Yeah, so those are the comparisons of salaries of clinical officers in Kenya compared to Uganda.